Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, my name is Paul Lastowicki. I'm the Deputy Chief of Support Services of Flagstaff Police Department. With me is the Chief of Police, Dan Musselman. In this presentation today, first we'll revisit the background of the problem that led to this discussion. From there, I'll briefly discuss the elements of the proposed vehicle nuisance noise ordinance and open the floor for questions and comments. A few years ago, in October of 2019, a Flagstaff resident emailed the mayor and council to express his concerns about excessive vehicle noise. Shortly after that, the council was presented with a petition titled Intentional Noise Pollution. This petition requested the city council consider the effects of noise on quality of life in Flagstaff. The citizen who presented the petition had asked the council to address excessive noise created when drivers intentionally modify their vehicles to make them louder. These concerns were presented to the council during a June 1st, 2021 council meeting. After that presentation, the council voted to have the police department draft an ordinance to address nuisance noise. An initial draft of an ordinance was presented to council on September 21st of last year. At the conclusion of that, a discussion council requested a work session to further discuss the details of this ordinance. Staff from the police department and the city attorney's office looked at several nuisance noise ordinances from municipalities in Arizona and of course across the country as well. Most of the municipalities that we looked at had ordinances that restrict nuisance noise in certain zoning districts to a specific decibel level during daytime and nighttime hours. And in addition, many of the ordinances we researched also had similar restrictions that applied to vehicle noise. We used criteria that were common across those ordinances to develop our own standards for our own proposed ordinance. On January 25th of this year, police department staff presented to the city council a revised noise ordinance with different options for enforceable sound levels and qualities for them to consider. At that time, council directed the city to hire a consultant to conduct a sound study and provide recommendations for noise enforcement. In June, MD Acoustics provided police department staff with a report detailing their findings and recommendations. Between June and October, Flagstaff Police Department facilitated several public outreach efforts to solicit input and from affected citizens. Eventually, the city council decided to split the nuisance noise ordinance into two separate codes, a vehicle nuisance noise ordinance and an ordinance that addressed neighborhood noise. Adoption of language specific to the neighborhood nuisance noise ordinance was deferred to an exploration by a work group, and the council decided to move forward with the vehicle nuisance noise ordinance. At this time, we have provided a copy of the vehicle nuisance noise ordinance to the staff summary. In summary, this slide represents the decibel limits at various speeds and according to different vehicle size classifications. And this slide represents the fine schedule that was requested by council. At this point, we would like to open it up to any comments or questions.
Thank you. Councilman McCarthy.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Over the weekend, I had a chance to read this, and I think it's a good ordinance. I did have some suggested changes, and I've passed out a copy to everyone, and I apologize for this small font. I won't get into why that happened. But I don't know if we want to go over these one by one, or if maybe, Paul, if you and I could get together, and most of them are kind of on the order of being nitpicky. You know, I'm a mechanical engineer, so it's kind of my nature to get into the weeds, so to speak. But there's nothing among my changes are really earth-shattering. They're mostly just minor refinements of definitions and things like that. So I don't know, do we want to get into them one by one, or?
Have you sent that to city staff? Maybe it could just be posted as
Yes,
you
I
have
sent it to
written.
staff, I
We
believe
can
it was
put it
on.
up there, but these are, from what I'm reading, is not like changes to the decibel levels or anything. It's to basically align the ordinance alongside our, Mark Standard Handbook for Mechanical Engineering and so forth, so that way it's more, scientifically associated. So if we wanted to post that, though, then we don't have to do line by line, but then we can see if the council has any recommendations for or against any of the specific segments outlined by Councilmember McCarthy. Sound good?
Yes, and basically to confirm what you said, yes, most of these are, minor things, definitions that, I did my master's thesis on noise issues too, so I have a lot of background on noise issues. And, but the substance of it is basically, I think, where it needs to be. I did some thinking about the suggested levels. They kind of passed the gut reaction test of what I think is reasonable. Well, I know, Paul, you and I, you're very aware that I have a professional quality sound meter now.
Yeah.
And so my gut reaction is the levels are good. I noticed that I compared them to a couple other cities I checked, and they're basically the same. I don't know how many cities you checked to kind of see what other cities are allowing, but this is in the ballpark for sure.
Could we post that on the screen? I just want to make sure the public can see it, but these are, just so you know, these are simple changes rather than, for example, instead of posted speed limit, it is changed to legal speed limit, since in certain areas, like residential areas, the speed limit is not posted, but by statute is 25 miles an hour. Those are some of the suggestions that Councilman McCarthy provided, which I do support. If that's something we can just throw up there for public consumption, that would be good.
Mayor and council, it may be wise to maybe take a 5-minute break, and we'll see if we can find that email and get it put into a Word document. Do you have it? Okay.
Okay, well, while that's getting posted, we can discuss on council if we have any questions or concerns regarding this, so that way we can continue to move forward.
At the top of page 2, on the back side, there is one change here that seems to be a little bit more significant than just wording. Councilmember McCarthy, I encourage you to share your reasoning, but I did just want to check with our law enforcement to make sure that this wasn't more of a change than we were bargaining for. The way it's worded is the category of motor vehicle measured from outside of the traffic lane, and the suggested change is measured from inside the traffic lane or at a larger distance. This is an actual substantive change. Maybe not much of one, but I just want to double check with our team that this isn't a significant alteration.
Well, let me just
practicality.
Let me just tell you what my reasoning was. The way I read it, the existing wording is the officer would have to be like right outside the lane. What if there's 2 lanes and he's at the sidewalk? That's not right outside the lane. So I was trying to say that they could be in the lane, which generally they probably would not enforce it in that manner, but they could be in the lane or at any farther distance. Maybe they're 75 feet away. And if even at that distance, the noise level was higher than what we have in the allowable table, they could still be cited. Of course, noise drops off with distance, so if it's 88 dB there, it was probably going to be 95 dB, you know, outside the lane. So that was kind of my reasoning.
I'm sure it's worded that way. I'm picturing a police officer standing in a lane of traffic. And so I just want some clarification on that and to make sure that the wording itself doesn't create any safety issues or fuzzy problems later on, unintended consequences.
Well, I certainly don't expect the police officer to stand in the lane by any means. I was envisioning maybe they were behind them, driving behind them with the meter outside the window or something. But let me make a general comment. All of these changes that I brought up, I'm willing to talk about them and make sure they make sense. I'm not rigid on this. I'm trying to just create a discussion. So, Mr. Musselman, maybe you have some comments on Mr. Aslan's comments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I took it to mean the same way Councilmember Aslan did, that we're not going to be driving behind a vehicle with the sound meter outside. We get in enough crashes without adding extra stuff to it. So that's why we wanted to just make sure we took the measurement from outside the lane. But Councilmember McCarthy's correct too. We could be 2 or 3 cars behind and the motorcycle stopped at a stoplight, pull out the sound meter, get a reading, and then that gives you enough to stop the car. So it doesn't restrict us. It actually allows us to take the reading from more places, which we're okay with.
That was my intent, to make it more flexible. And actually, if the officer measures farther away, that gives an advantage to the person that's making the noise, because if it's really that loud, that much farther away, it would be even worse closer in.
Sterling?
So yes, and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, Senior Assistant City Attorney and Police Advisor Mary Ann Sullivan wasn't able to be here with us this evening, but we've discussed this, and I know she discussed it with the chief as well. That comment about the flexibility is actually greater with the language as it was written rather than with the change. That flexibility would be better, or we would have a more flexible situation if the change is not incorporated. That's aside from the safety factor of trying to drive and measure sound at the same time, which we would recommend against.
Thank you. I do have Councilmember Shimoni with a question here as well. So, Councilmember Shimoni?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief and Deputy Chief. Quick question. My question is, are we going to be responding to calls? Like if someone says, hey, 911, there's a fast, loud car down my street, are we going to be sending officers to respond to that, even if like it's just to touch base with that neighbor and say that, hey, we're here and we're checking? Or are we going to proactively, go out to certain key spots at certain times and engage that way? Or is it both?
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Councilmember Shimoni, it's actually going to be both. So if we get a continuing complaint of a certain area, say close to a high school, that they're racing away, we may go out and proactively patrol that based on complaints. But if a citizen calls in and wants to give their name and their information and wants to take contact, we will for sure go out and contact that citizen and try and investigate it from that point, knowing full well that that vehicle is probably going to be gone by the time we get there. But I think there's still some other ways we can try and follow up on that and determine who that is and try and make sure that vehicle complies with the ordinance.
And Chief, thank you for that. Do you have concerns about staff time or, officer time in going down that rabbit hole of chasing this car from neighbors complaining?
Yes, thank you. That's a fair question. Yes and no. So all of our calls are prioritized, so we're not going to hold an injury accident to go to this call. It gets put in the queue, and then where it lands, it lands. And our officers and supervisors monitor the radio pretty regularly, and they can make that discretionary decision that, yes, I need to break and go to this other call. That's a higher priority. And we'll still try and get back to the reporting party on that call, but it may be delayed.
Okay, and Mayor and Council, last question from me, Chief. Are we removing anything from the list of obligations of, things that our officers respond to as we add this topic, potentially add this topic on the list?
Yeah, Mayor, council members, no, we're not removing any other calls for service that we normally go to. This would just be added to it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Aslan?
I do. It's kind of popcorn style. We're bouncing around here a little bit. We got an email recently from Duffy mentioning the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy publishing an article about unmanned technological methods to deal with this noise problem. Devices meant to function like speed cameras. Wondering if you could comment on that, or if you have any thoughts, or if you looked into that at all?
Yeah, I did look into that, and currently that technology only exists in France. They're the only place that's using that. The email addressed the cameras that are on a lot of the traffic signals throughout the city and a lot of our intersections. Those cameras that are already in place only record information for about 4 seconds before writing over that information. And it's only as a kind of a technology to help control the timely cycling of traffic signals and smart intersections. And that's its own, those cameras' only purpose. They don't come with microphones or anything like that. What the email referred to, or that article referred to, is actually kind of a cluster of microphones, and they're called sound radar. So these are only experimental, and France doesn't even use them yet. They're still exploring that technology to enforce or to kind of paint a picture of what their sound hotspots look like.
Okay, so it sounds like the cart before the horse a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Maybe something we could take advantage of down the road in the future. It seems like a good idea to follow up on, but thank you for already doing that, for following up on that, and we'll put that one in we'll put a pin in that one for a little while and come back to it at some later point. I'm glad to be able to bring up the question, but we can get back to the more specific things where we're grounded on in reality for now.
Not sure if I'm good with putting microphones throughout the city to be tracking people's comments and sounds by the government, but
It's a tall
you
order.
know, just throwing that out there. But thank you for researching that, and we can get back to the issue at hand. Councilmember McCarthy.
Yes, Chief, before the meeting, you caught me, and we had an extremely brief conversation about how to handle some of these definitions, specifically sound level and decibels. I suggest that maybe you and I or Paul get together after the meeting or today or some other day and kind of work on that together and wordsmith it. I don't think we have any these aren't issues that affect the policy. They're more just about definitions.
And I would just like to say, aside from the inside and outside of the traffic lane suggestion that Councilman McCarthy had, I do think it's befitting to have definitions that align with, mechanical engineering manuals and so forth. And I would like to invite any council member who may have, some issues with any of the other subsections suggested by Councilman McCarthy to please speak up now. Otherwise, that we can move forward with the majority of the suggestions that Councilmember McCarthy has stated. Councilmember Shimoni.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a general comment, not necessarily in regards to Councilmember McCarthy's recommendations. Do you want me to go ahead with it now or hold off?
No, I think now is a good time. I'm not seeing any comments regarding the specific word changes suggested, so we can move
Okay.
on.
Well, I'll share my thoughts, and Chief and Deputy Chief, I don't think you'll be too surprised on where I'm at on this. And so, Mayor and Council, I really struggle with this one. I really do. It's one thing to regulate a building and the noise produced by a building. It's another thing to try to regulate and enforce a moving vehicle sound. And so I have a few comments, Mayor and Council, please bear with me, I won't be long. But my opening comment I like to make is just my struggles with the opening of the agenda item and the quote from the email that says, quote, "I can't count the number of times I have been assaulted by blasts of noise from cars spewing their deep and threatening engine." I'm guessing that next word is vibration. "Their abuse can be heard, even felt from blocks away." I don't know why that really bothers me. I think maybe it's partially because my family comes from a low-income neighborhood of Jerusalem, and we've kind of, built our lives up with nothing. And to me, that kind of quote, in my opinion, has a lot of privilege in that complaints, and I really struggle with that. It really bothers me, personally, right? And Mayor, I see your head nodding, and I appreciate that. Officer time, when I did ride-alongs, Chief, with our officers, I really saw they really do care, right? They're great people that really do believe and care about the community, but we were responding to calls that were low level across town, dog off a leash in Buffalo Park. We're at the opposite side of town, and it's 20 minutes ago because we had other priorities, but then we still had to respond to it because it's in the queue, right, Chief? And it's just like, by the time we got there, it was 40 minutes after the fact, and we tried to find the person who called, and 20, 30 minutes went by before that officer was able to take the next call in the queue. And so I really struggle with us responding to these complaints and encouraging our community to complain like this, and that we're going to actually engage with that. When I speak to chiefs across the state, and even at times at the national level in different states, they tell me they don't respond to calls like these. Maybe not the noise one, but like the dog off leash and this lower level, levels of service calls. They just don't have the time to respond to them. But yet, we take pride in that, and I respect that, Chief. I do. I see the value in it, but I just hate to see us keep adding to the list of things we respond to, given how short-staffed we are and the burnout that we have is real. I just, in talking to officers, I think that I don't feel comfortable adding more to their plate, especially things like this. And then, let's see. I don't personally think having officers chasing down vehicles that are too loud is appropriate. I just don't. And then, okay, I'm almost done my comments. I have significant concerns about who this is going to more significantly impact. And I have a fear that this is going to negatively impact lower income populations in our community. And I really have concerns that that's who's going to really get hit by this. And I also have concerns about the certification and the continued recertification costs, right? We have turnover. This is not cheap. It's going to add up. And I really struggle with that. And then I was glad to see the email from the resident, Duffy, saying that she too had issues with the financial drain. And although I know she wants to see this addressed, I was glad that her and I were on the same page about the cost being a concern. And we're neighbors. We live next to each other. I hear the same car that they're talking about. It bothers me too, but you know what? I live with it. I hold my breath. I count to 10. The car's gone. Life goes on. No big deal, right? I'm grateful to have a home in Flagstaff. I'm privileged to have a home in Flag that I'm renting, right? So it's one thing to regulate and enforce noise at a location like a structure. It's another thing to be chasing down vehicles that we call are too loud. I'm not supportive of this, if you can't tell where my comments are going. I appreciate the work that's gone into this. And maybe I'd be more supportive if our staffing was at closer to 100%. But I just don't see the need to be moving forward with this as a standalone, with all due respect. I think that, again, the structure is another conversation that I think I'm more supportive of. But this one for me is I'm just not in favor. So thank you for hearing me out. And thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni. And yeah, just to, I agree on multiple levels with you on this ordinance. To me, this just provides a tool in terms of, you know, if we're already having a vehicle looking for speeders through the neighborhood and have a sound mic on it at the same time, we know at what time of day some people are coming down with their loud, obnoxious, adjusted vehicles that intentionally put on the glass pack or whatnot to make noise, then you know what, I don't think that's adding on. I don't think we're gonna be, you know, responding to somebody zooming down the street and 20 minutes later coming down to try to address the situation, but it allows some level of notification to individuals who may be there while the police are already there. And I also have concerns with the, you know, potentially impacting those that may not be able to afford to replace their muffler and so forth. But with this ordinance, we're providing some discretion. So that way, we're not targeting individuals that can't afford to repair their vehicle, but rather those that intentionally upgrade their vehicle to make noise obnoxiously. So I agree with a lot of your points, and I absolutely see where you're coming from, but I don't think how it's written and how we're approaching it is going to be targeting those who just can't afford to upgrade their vehicle. It's those who are upgrading it to be obnoxious. And I also don't see us trying to respond to calls that, hey, somebody just drove down my street, can you go track them down because they were noisy, but rather the police are already there. They have the device in hand just along with their speedometer to be able to, you know, potentially address the situation, and especially when some of these cases are repetitive at a certain time of day, it may allow us a tool to notify that individual, be there when the case occurs, and hopefully, you know, calm down the situation.
Mayor,
Yes,
follow-up?
Councilmember Schwenny.
Thank you. So I hear you and I appreciate that. I agree with a lot of what you said. My understanding, Mayor, is it's not just that the officer, if there's an officer there and there's a car going by, they can pull out their sound radar and check for the sound levels, right? If they're equipped and, you know, trained, et cetera. But that's one component that you talked about. The other component, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but pretty sure I understood you correctly in that if someone from my neighborhood or any neighborhood picks up the phone and says, hey, there's a fast car or a car making too much noise, that gets added to the queue, Mayor. And if there's not an officer at the site at that location, an officer will address that queue item. And they will show up 10, 20, 30 minutes later. They will make contact with the resident that called in and say, hey, we are here. We're doing a report, or we're just checking in and touch base, let you know that we're here. We've made contact. We've tried to address the issue. And so that might take 40 minutes of an officer's time at the end of the day, or 20 minutes. I don't know. Just depends on the situation. But if there was a way, Chief, to separate the two and make it what the mayor was saying, I'd be more in favor of that. If an officer is there and they have another tool in their tool chest, right, Mayor? Like, to your point, that's great. But if we're responding to a call 20, 30 minutes later, I just feel like it's not a good use of our limited resources.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni, and I agree with that. If, Chief, if you'd like to speak to that fact.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of council. So we do try and respond to every call that comes in, and we find that when we don't, your emails start blowing up, and we have to respond to it after
Really?
the
I've
fact.
never known that.
Anyway, so it's just better to try and do it on the front end. We may not be there in time to address the issue, but the residents will still feel heard, and over time, officers get to know who's in their beat, who the problems, where the problems are. And usually the speeding problems, in some cases, I think they're gonna overlap with the loud vehicles. I mean, the places where we have speeding complaints, we're usually gonna be there anyway. And it is, most of the vehicles we're talking about here, I do believe are gonna be those that go out and buy the aftermarket mufflers to intentionally make their vehicles louder. The normal, everyday, off the dealer lots vehicles, they're probably not gonna be loud enough to be in violation of this ordinance. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, just a quick point, and I think everybody at the dais knows this, but for those listening online, when we talk about this wordsmithing, this is all coming back to council again. So it isn't like, you know, there's time to negotiate those little nitpicky changes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a work session item, so we're not voting tonight, just giving direction on how we would shape it if we were wanting to move forward with the vote on it. At this point, unless standard corrected, I feel like we've gotten a certain level of direction in terms of the wordsmithing we would like to see. And we've had work sessions before on this to kind of purview, for example, the level of fines or whatever else may be associated with it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does staff need any further direction on this item aside from what we've stated with Councilmember McCarthy's changes to with removing the inside-outside of lane language?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of council. I think we're good. We will sit down with Councilmember McCarthy and incorporate or come to compromise on those things we can. But yes, we have proper direction. And then we will be bringing back a draft to you December 6th. Will be the first read of a draft ordinance. Excellent.
And I do appreciate Councilman McCarthy's attention to detail on this fact, as always. So with that, thank you very much, for your work on this.